Well, hello and welcome to our August 2nd edition of Week to Week, the political roundtable from the Commonwealth Club of California. If you have a cell phone or anything that makes noise, if you could maybe put it on silent or turn it off, that'd be great. It's almost always someone who will have their spouse calling them during the show. Oh. Here's a tip. Bring your spouse to the show, and then they can't call you and interrupt it. I'm John Zipper, your host for Week to Week. Tonight we will definitely begin with the famous American who is once again in the news. I, of course, am referring to Lizzo, the singer, who is facing accusations of fat shaming, but this time she's being the one accused. You know what? We're not going to have enough time to cover that one enough. Well, okay, we'll do that in a separate program. Tonight we'll just focus on political news, and we'll get to all of it tonight with our great panelists. Let's meet them tonight, or re-meet them, because I'm sure you've all met them before. On the far end is Carla Marinucci. She's the former writer of the Politico California Playbook, as well as the former senior political reporter for the San Francisco Chronicle. Welcome back, Carla.
Oh.
Next to her is Dr. Larry Gersten, a political science professor emeritus at San Jose State University. He's also a political analyst for NBC Bay Area. He's author most recently of California's recall election of Gavin Newsom, COVID-19 and the Test of Leadership. In December, you have a new book coming out. What is the title of it?
Oh gosh, give me a second. This is terrible. This is really off. I can't remember these things. I don't know. It's about Trumpism, bigotry, and the threat to American democracy.
So, very timely.
Light reading.
And Larry's on Twitter at @LGersten. And next to me is Melissa Cain, host of the Get Out the Bet podcast. She's a political analyst and an attorney, and she's on Twitter at ConstitutionMel. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Twitter.
Sorry.
What did I say? Twitter? Yes, Twitter.
It doesn't exist.
X, excuse
X,
me.
right.
Let's get on to our roundtable, and yes, let's start talking about indictment number 3. The former President Donald Trump, he's collecting indictments like some people collect comic books. So yesterday, Special Counsel Jack Smith announced the indictment of Trump on 4 counts related to the attempt to overturn the 2020 presidential election. He being Trump, is scheduled for a court appearance on this tomorrow in Washington. Start with you, Carla. What do we know so far about this indictment, and were you surprised by any of it?
I mean, we're at a moment here in this country. I mean, this indictment was stunning. I think for a lot of us it was sickening to see happen, this moment in American history, a former American president being charged with essentially betraying the nation. The headline in the New York Daily News was "Crimes Against Democracy." We've never seen anything like this. This is the most important case the Department of Justice has ever handled. Years in the making, a 45-page indictment, and this is something that I think Trump wanted. He could have put a stop to this at any point along the last year. He didn't. It raises him money. It fortifies his base. We're at a point now where we're looking at the American public facing an election in which maybe the leading Republican candidate will be on trial. And you have, I think, some political observers saying this is a moment for American democracy that is unlike anything we've seen, in that the damage to American democracy around the world as this fiasco goes on, as this drama unfolds next year with Trump on trial. If that happens, I mean, there's no calculation. We're in a completely different universe at this point.
Larry, what's your thought?
I want to hear more. I think Carly touched on some of the stuff that I would say. I mean, I'm reminded of the comment that Trump made back shortly after he announced, and you might remember, he said, I can walk down, I think it was Fifth Avenue, and shoot somebody, it wouldn't cost me a vote. Something like that. Mm-hmm. And I think there's some truth to that. There really is. It's a cult. That's what it is, Trumpism. And what people, I think, don't necessarily understand is that the cult goes beyond him. Think about that, 447 members of Congress who voted to overturn the election after they'd gone through the insurrection. That says a whole lot. The New York Times the other day had a poll basically asking how people felt about Trump and what he's done. Since the election, 71% said he has done nothing wrong except exercising free speech. 17% said he had threatened democracy. Wow, this is pretty impressive stuff. I want to take a little issue with what Carla said, and I've heard it from other people, by the way, that he's invited this. I don't think so. I think if he invited anything, it was the second indictment, the one dealing with the boxes that were, you know, in every place, you know, and that kind of stuff. I think he invited that because he had lots of opportunities to do something about it. They really opened the door. Please do this, do that. And he just said, "The hell with you." So I don't think he invited this simply because this all happened shortly after the presidential election and leading all the way up to 1/6. So relatively speaking, I think he wanted to keep his job, and he was going to do everything he could to keep that job, no matter what it took, no matter what laws were broken, no matter what people he stepped over, no matter what. And you know, out of that came Jack Smith's indictment and all the list of things, four elements that came out 2 days ago, I guess it is. So I agree with Carla. I think it's more than a troubling time. It's sort of like, who are we? What are we really about? Are we about to throw everything out? No matter what the laws are, no matter what remember, he's the one who said it's time that we turn away from the Constitution. Wow. Oh, where would you hear that? Maybe in some African country, in the United States? Oh, unbelievable. So you know, it's going to be something the next 16 months, because at the end of the day, it does look like Trump versus Biden. And it'll be nice if there's a trial. This one has the best shot of being a trial because it's tight.
You mean before the election?
Yeah, before the election.
Yeah.
But, you know, if there's anything Donald Trump is a master at, among others, it's delay. So we're going to see what people think.
I'm reminded of what David Frum said when he spoke at the club somewhere during Trump's term, and it was something to the effect of, Donald Trump may not be particularly interested in doing the job of president. You know, he kind of was lackadaisical about that, but he probably has the most tenacious will to hold on to power of anyone he's ever seen in that position.
But if I could just say one thing, yes, he does. But there are millions of people who look to him as their savior. And if you look at the data out of that Times poll, he and the vast majority of Republicans are in sync. Some of us, you say, well, maybe he's an outlier. Maybe he's sort of weird. He's not. As far as they're concerned, he is their hero. And there are many more like him ready to step in. So I think that was an eye-opener for me.
But isn't that what's partly so disturbing here? You look at this New York Times poll, 43-43. They're tied. In fact, Trump's approval rating is higher than Joe Biden's at this point. With the economy in decent shape, unemployment at the lowest level in decades, and 62% of Americans disapprove of how Joe Biden is handling the economy. At this point, this is a sort of a mystery as to how these polls are looking, I think.
Melissa?
I have to disagree. I think that what the stuff that the lawsuit is about is really disheartening and it can feel really alienating. But I read that complaint, and I will confess it here, I teared up, because this is how it is supposed to work. No one is above the law. They had to file this lawsuit, and maybe he's not guilty of it, and maybe he'll get reelected. I don't know, but this had to happen. we cannot let it stand, right? You do this stuff, you're gonna have to explain to yourself, you're gonna have to explain yourself in a court of law how you, in your mind, believed that this was in any way real. And that process, I think, is really what we're about. In America, nobody's above it, and I'm proud of it.
So, Melissa, sticking with you then, what does the prosecution need to prove in court? What do they need to convince a judge or a jury of in order to get a conviction on these 4 counts?
Well, so there are sort of fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud. And so when you have a fraud count, and these are hard to prove actually, because in this case, you have a situation where you have to prove that the president knew what he was saying was a lie. And that's where he's going to make some potential inroads, because if he can argue, no, I truly believed that the election had been stolen, then that's going to prevent the prosecution from proving that piece of the charge, right? That mental intent to commit fraud is the critical part of fraud. It's part of why fraud is so punishable by so many years in jail, because it's really hard to prove. But if you do it, we sort of come down on you really hard for it. So there's this issue of, did you truly believe that this was real, that the election was truly stolen? So that's one thing. The second thing is there is a presidential immunity potentially, thanks Nixon for everything, for so many precedents. But there's an old Supreme Court case involving Richard Nixon around around sort of an unqualified immunity, an extraordinary level of immunity for things that a president does while in office. And arguably, and Trump's lawyers are going to argue that, pursuing or looking into potential election fraud is sort of in his purview. Now, that may be a tenuous argument, you might think, but those are 2 main things that the prosecution's really going to have to grapple with. How do you take this outside of politics, and how do you prove what was in his mind when, arguably he had convinced himself, and he was surrounded by some truly special folks who were able to convince him as well. So those are
I think we've already said, and Melissa's right. I mean, that is what they're going to have to prove. And we've already heard Trump's lawyer say, well, I'd like to see them prove that he really understood. But the fact is, this indictment, chapter and verse, lists election officials, his own staff, countless people telling him there is no way he won this election. In fact, Mike Pence, who appears to be, a major source in this whole indictment, was told, "You're too honest." Some of the quotes about this whole being a conspiracy theory from the mothership, etc. I mean, the fact is, it looks like Jack Smith did his homework on that front. What's, I think, disturbing is to watch a whole army, a parade of Republicans say, well, this is a First Amendment issue. Does he not have the ability to express his doubts about the election? Wait a minute. I mean, Tony Soprano can sit there and say, maybe we should ice some of my opponents. It's when he goes out and gathers the armies and sends them out there to do it that it becomes not a free speech issue, but a conspiracy issue and a criminal issue. And that is the difference here. And the Republicans who are out there saying that this is just First Amendment know that.
Larry?
There are, and by the way, this is going to sound a little silly, but if you haven't had a chance to read this indictment, it is unbelievable. It really is. I mean, it's like a mystery book. I mean, it's real. There are 37 times.
And where can people find it?
Online, real easy.
And New York Times has a great annotated version. I highly recommend,
oh, no, read the whole thing. There are 37 times in that indictment where it says Trump knowingly knew, and that comes after somebody told him, no, you lost by, and he said, yeah, I know. And probably the most, riveting one is when he's meeting with General Milley after the election, and Milley is raising some international issue, and Trump said, well, that's for the next guy to decide. Okay, excuse me, okay? So this idea about, I understand what you're talking about, but it's a high bar. But I think Smith goes way out of his way with all these different comments about the high bar. And the other thing I think that's so disconcerting is about the 7 states where Trump and his associates worked so hard to get fake electors to submit the election results, which were different because they said they were. This is bad. And in Michigan now, there are at least 2 guys who are being charged with this. It looks like it may happen in Arizona, it may happen in some other states. This was a real coup, you guys. This is the real deal right here in this country. And if the American public is willing to accept this come November of next year, it's going to say a whole lot about who we are.
Yeah, and I think one thing to watch is how the other Republican presidential candidates deal with this, how the Republican Party deals with it. Here in California, they've invited Trump. He's coming here on September 29th to speak to the Republican Party in California. So it's Ron DeSantis. But they're welcoming him he's going to be given a hero's welcome, I guarantee you, at that convention. And it's going to be interesting to watch. None of them, with the exception of Christie, Will Hurd, and Asa Hutchinson, have volunteered or even suggested there was wrongdoing on Trump's part. DeSantis trying to walk a tightrope here. It's just going to be fascinating, especially as these polls, if we watch them change in reaction to this.
I do want to say one thing. I think there may be a different reaction to this one than the first 2. The first one, okay, he's being charged with misusing funds to pay a porn star. All right. Relatively speaking, what the hell?
Who hasn't done that?
I mean, who hasn't done that, right? Okay, speak for yourself. My wife's here. The second one is all these boxes, moving boxes. What moving boxes? This one,
yeah,
you better believe you're going to see one commercial after another of the assault on the Capitol and what it meant, and you're going to see him voicing over it. And I think this may have a different effect on especially undecideds than the other 2. I think this may be different.
I do still think he's the front runner to be the nominee, right? I mean, this may affect the general election, but one of the things that that we see happening, we actually see in California recently, is the Republican Party, which is really a lot of folks who maybe consider themselves conservatives, old school conservatives, have left the party or are not really engaging in party politics. And so what's left, at least back in 2020, certainly were a lot of Trump supporters. And what they've done is pass rules at the national level, now at the state level, to close a number of primaries so that only people registered with the party can vote. So people who are independent, who might have a moderating influence, won't get a chance to vote. And there've always been a couple of closed primaries. Like it's not a new thing, but there are more now. There are states where they're moving directly to create caucuses, which are even more closed off. And so specifically moving to keep independents and sort of unaffiliated folks are out of those processes. In California, what they've just done is move to change the way the state allocates delegates for the Republican convention from a congressional district-based system to a one big lump sum for the state. So all you have to do is come into Irvine, where he's going to speak, and you're going to win that San Diego area, that Orange County area, the Inland Empire. And that's it. You never have to come up north. And if anybody who gets 50% plus 1 in the statewide voting gets all of the delegates.
Right.
And that used to not be the case. And if no one gets that, then they do a proportional allocation. But there's all these little rule changes that are happening to make the circumstances possible for, and that I think will make it easier for Donald Trump.
Yeah,
to be the
absolutely
nominee.
favors Donald Trump. Exactly. So,
And I think that's the goal, and I think that's what they're doing. It's still fairly unsettled. There's lots of lawsuits and things happening, and I think they have until October to kind of get that stuff under control. But if you look at the rules, and once we start with the primaries start actually happening, I think you're going to see a lot more support for Donald Trump, because that's part of how it was designed.
Okay, we have some questions from the audience. First, for Carla Marinucci, how could Trump have stopped this indictment if he was, you're kind of saying he was kind of welcoming, could he have done anything
He has spent the last year taunting the prosecutors, taunting the Department of Justice. At no point did we hear any kind of apologies or any kind of admission,
negotiations.
or that just doesn't happen with him. He could have toned this down and brought it down. He did not. He's been pouring gasoline on the fire for a year.
Okay. Someone asks, can you discuss the legal reasons why the current indictment does not include the charge of insurrection? Any thoughts on that?
You want to answer that?
No, you can go.
You're the lawyer. I'm just a wannabe. What I heard was that he wanted to make this streamlined, which is also why nobody else was charged. Insurrection got into the flaky free speech stuff, which is not flaky, I don't mean to say that, but I mean, free speech, First Amendment stuff is, first of all, there's no such thing as an absolute amendment. Take a big stick and knock that out, okay? There's always limits. So he was afraid, I've read, that if the insurrection part literally was mentioned, that would get to the whole speech thing he gave, and it was right to do that and whatnot. So they kept that out. Although if you read the indictment, you can see how it all leads up to the insurrection. Everything but, so that's why they didn't include the insurrection. But believe you me, that's the obvious result of all the other elements that he's talking about. In that's a very, in my judgment, a very well done indictment. And I'm serious. I mean, to read it, you go,
Yeah.
really? And you know what? Every one of those things is true.
Okay, a couple questions from the audience about what might his sentence be, or if he were to be convicted, what might happen to him? I mean, would it be likely he would go to prison, or is this the kind of thing where, I don't know, I mean, they're criminal cases, right? So it would be a prison potential.
And we've already heard Marjorie Taylor Greene say she would vote for him even if he were in prison. So that's the kind of thing. From what I understand, a 10-year prison sentence is sort of a minimum of what's being talked about. Whether that will ever come to that is another issue. Of course, should Trump get elected, this whole thing goes away.
Correct.
He can order his Department of Justice to drop the whole thing. We're already having discussions from the Republican candidates about and they're all rushing to say who's going to pardon him. So, this is why the actual the presidential election and the polls there are so interesting, and the weakness of Joe Biden, which I assume we're going to get into too. But the Democrats have got to be sweating this a little bit too. There's no question.
I would tell you something. When I was a young man, yes, I was once a young man, I remember when the whole Nixon thing happened, and he resigned, and Ford pardoned him, and I was so angry with him. I was angry. That SOB ought to be in there chopping up rocks the rest of his life. And then as I became more acquainted with my own discipline and thought about what it meant and whatnot, it dawned on me. It's the wrong thing. The punishment is in convicting him. You put him in prison and he becomes a martyr. And I really think that causes many more problems than it does do anything good. But it took me a long time to get there.
Eugene V. Debs ran from prison. He ran for the Socialist Party for president from prison. He never got more than a few points of support, so I don't think anyone really looked into whether you can run for president from prison. Like, it wasn't, I think, a question that people felt they really needed to ask.
He wasn't a front runner.
Speaking, but he was in jail during the election. So, I mean, we've got at least that precedent. Imagine Donald Trump relying on a socialist as precedent for potentially, not that he would. I tend to agree with Professor Gerson here.
Okay, this is for anyone. Is Trump a brain-eating amoeba? I'm just reading it.
What was I going to say?
I ain't going there.
Oh, okay. Well then, recently, I'm sure we've all seen this or read about it, the story about Dianne Feinstein, the U.S. Senator from California, appearing flustered during a hearing, someone basically telling her to just go ahead and vote yes. And that kind of added to the feeling among many that maybe she's not up to the job anymore. Now, in February, of course, she's already said she's not running again, but she'll fill out her term. Then there was a situation last week when Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell fell silent while he was talking before reporters. He was eventually led away, but then returned in a little bit to continue speaking. Obviously, this brings up the issues of should there be age limits, should there be competency tests, something like that. What do you think about that? Or should voters be able to vote for whoever they want for the office?
Apparently, there was a situation today where Senator Feinstein was supposed to appear at a 150th celebration for a cable car. Her office said she was going to appear. She did not appear. They said she wasn't feeling well. Pelosi kind of stood in for her at this event and defended her again. Let's remember, Feinstein's on the Judiciary Committee. That is an important seat. The Republicans are not going to, at least Mitch McConnell has indicated he doesn't intend to help the Democrats fill that seat. It is a linchpin when it comes to confirming Joe Biden's choice for judges.
So fill that out. So literally, if she were to resign, her replacement wouldn't necessarily get that position. The Republicans aren't going to allow the Democrats to put.
With the Senate so close, Democrats need every vote they can get.
Which means Biden gets no more judges elected.
If she were to resign and Governor Newsom appoints somebody, then they're short a member of that committee. I can't tell you that person he appoints would be on that committee, but the Democrats would get another member. And then the question gets, and it gets very dicey. Would Republicans fight the other member depending upon who he or she was?
Right.
But the Democrats would be entitled to another member, but she's got to resign. She can't just say, well, I'm going to resign from the committee. No, they'll hold the committee on that. The Republicans will. Yeah. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think the McConnell incident in the last week, in which he appeared to freeze up for 30 long seconds in front of the mic. Feinstein, of course, she's not talking to the press there in Washington. She's not seen that often. She had an incident where she didn't seem to know exactly how to take the vote. They had to tell her to do it. But the bottom line is, as Larry said, it gets complicated if she resigns. Who Gavin Newsom appoints. Remember, he has promised to appoint a black woman to that seat should Dianne Feinstein resign. Who is that? Some have suggested Barbara Lee, who's already running. And others have suggested perhaps Shirley Weber, Secretary of State. But the fact is, this gets to be a very complicated situation, and we've got a very sort of vibrant race going to replace Feinstein in 2024.
Well, let's get into that race.
Yeah.
We've got Katie Porter, we've got Adam Schiff, we've got Barbara Lee, who, by the way, will be here next week to talking about it. On the Republican side, Eric Early. Are there others announced or expected that I'm missing?
Maybe Steve Garvey.
Steve Garvey?
Steve Garvey was a very popular former player of the LA Dodgers.
Yes, right.
I'm sorry, I mentioned LA, forgive me.
But to watch the polls in this one has been interesting because Adam Schiff had a big lead for a long time, of course. He was on the January 6th committee. He led one of the impeachments of Donald Trump, so well known to the American public. He raised, he's got about $8 million in the bank. He's got a ton of money. 10 times the amount of money as Katie Porter. But in the latest PPIC poll, Porter has moved ahead of him.
Point.
She's got 19 to Schiff 16, and Lee is at 13. She's come up. It's almost like a dead heat right at this point.
Melissa?
Well, I think we've got about a year for folks to jump in. So I'm still waiting. I don't think it's a name recognition thing either. Adam Schiff was very prominent during the Trump administration. I think that's how he raised so much money, as like being the guy, going after Donald Trump. And I remember him just getting mobbed at the state convention, at the state Democratic convention. And so he had this great moment, but he's not, no one's getting over 20% in any of these polls. I think people are waiting to see who else is going to get in. I don't think people are particularly thrilled and motivated by anyone who's running just yet. So I'd still like to see some more folks from the Bay Area. Barbara Lee's great. Maybe a Ro Khanna. I still think maybe somebody like an Eleni Koudalakis or somebody like that could jump in. There's always the chance of we always sort of float the the billionaire, tech person who can jump
Yeah.
in.
And we do have there is a tech person in the race.
Lexi Reed, I think
Yeah,
is
yeah.
her
Oh,
name.
yes, Lexi Reese.
I'm sorry, Lexi Reese. So I mean, I think there's still a lot of time for people to surface, but I don't think the public, even though there's decent name recognition, have been really grabbed by any of the folks who have jumped in so far. And I think for Democrats who are sort of more establishment Democrats, there is a need to hold off, right? You don't want to be seen as the person kind of like the vulture kind of circling the carcass of someone so venerated. So I think the more party stalwart folks are maybe waiting a bit until closer to the election to jump in.
Larry?
I want to go back to your question because I don't think we answered it about should we come up with an age or a means test as somebody sort of finding himself in that position now. I don't know how it snuck up. I'm old-fashioned in that I think the vote is the test. And I'm going to reveal something, and that is when Dianne Feinstein was reelected last time, I did not vote for her. Now, I'm a very big fan of Dianne Feinstein. I really am. I love what she did with gun control. I love the fact that she's such a role model for women. I've loved what she's done with the desert and all kinds of things. But she, at the time, was 85 years old. And I thought to myself, self, this is not going to work. And I believe that at the end of the day, we have to take responsibility. Us. Okay? We can't pawn it off on somebody else. It's the same thing regarding term limits. Don't come up with these silly ways of artificially working something out. Take control, own what you're doing, and understand what's going on. And unless we're willing to do it, things like this are going to happen all the time. And I do think this is where the public, the voters, need to take some ownership of what's going on. We cannot foist these things off to other people for artificial means of taking an IQ test, a means test, memorizing things. You see how smart I am? I mean, I just don't think so. Now, I'm done with that. I feel better. Thank you.
I'd love to see a test, though.
I'd fail it. As far as the Senate goes, I'm just delighted. I think you got some great people running. And I think it's going to be an interesting fight. And who knows? It costs a lot to run for the Senate. Mm-hmm. This is not a cheap seat. $10, $15 million you got to think about automatically. And not everybody has access to that. But here's the interesting thing is, we're looking at the possibility of something like an Eric Early being one of the two come November. Because remember, it's the top two, right? So it could be the Democrats get most of the votes, but if Early gets one of the two highest votes, you got a Republican running in the general election. Watch for that.
I think if the Trump, drama goes on, the Republican Party here is going to see some real issues in terms of whether they can come in top two in these kind of races. I think what's interesting about the Senate race is you've got Adam Schiff in a safe Democratic district. You got Barbara Lee in a safe Democratic district, but Katie Porter is not.
She is
and
not.
I've heard some Democrats say, I love Katie Porter. I'm a big fan of hers, and she has made huge waves in Congress in the short time she's been there. But she's in a district that really matters to Democrats. And some of them are saying, she should, but now she's leading the polls. So now the drama is going to be even more interesting, I think.
But to be clear, though, any of those kind of limitations would require constitutional amendment. I don't know if y'all remember, but in California, we tried. We tried to have term limits for our federal officials, but the Supreme Court ruled against it and said, you cannot do that. All the requirements for office are in the Constitution. And unless you change that, you can't, as a state, sort of limit the Dianne Feinstein, the senators, and your members of Congress. So that's why we have term limits for members of the Assembly and State Senate, but not those federal officials. Now, and in part because at the Constitutional Convention, the Virginia plan, I'm bringing it back to 7th grade social studies here for a minute. The Virginia plan, the initial plan that the founders considered, had term limits in it. And recall, both for the House and the Senate, what became the House and Senate, for numbers that were TBD. But it was sort of there with this space, and they, without objection, just removed it. There's no record of a debate about it. They just sort of took one look at it and said, probably were going to run for those seats, so let's not limit them. That's my guess. But there was no debate. Everyone's like, one General Pinckney's like, we should get rid of this. And everyone's like, yeah. And so they did. And it was just like that. And so because they considered it and rejected it, you have to you can't just sort of say it's implied or anything like that. It's sort of right in there. And so that's why it requires a federal amendment to put an age limit or a term limit.
I think it's interesting because there is such a gerontocracy in California politics, particularly in the House. And my buddy Joe Garofoli at the Chronicle just did a good story on it. Pelosi's 83, Anna Eshoo 80, Garamendi 78, Barbara Lee 77, Lofgren 75.
These are fine numbers for me, Carla.
There's people waiting in the wings, and we know here in San Francisco, although nobody would say, kind of compare the Pelosi situation to Feinstein, because you've done it too, having to follow Pelosi around on her 5-inch heels, as she does 6 events a day. It's exhausting. She does it. That's a whole other issue. But we know Scott Wiener is waiting in the wings here. He's getting his campaign together, and other people are hanging on to see what happens to all these, elder House members. Let's put it that way.
For the U.S. Senate seat on the Republican side, do you think Lan He-chen might throw his hat in? He's apparently kind of building up is it a PAC or something? He's trying to stay involved.
Was an example of what the Republican Party in California could put forward with some promise in the future. He was appointed by President Obama to the Social Security Commission, but he's also, of course, somebody who advised Mitt Romney, et cetera. He's been down at Stanford, highly respected, and a middle-of-the-road Republican. Now, he came in with 40-something% in the controller's race, which is about the ceiling for anybody in the Republican Party in California at this point. If the party turns toward Trump, continues to turn toward Trump, I think that 40% whatever disintegrates even more.
I mean, he's going to be on the same ticket, right? And so you're going to get it's hard to distance yourself when all the commercials are just showing the January 6th, attack. So it's one thing to run sort of on a different ticket, but once you got that R next to your name in a year involving Donald Trump, I think it's a lot harder.
Lan He-chen is a very bright guy and he's been on here.
Yeah.
We've been with him. PhD, law degree. I don't know how many other degrees he's got. I mean, he's quite bright and very articulate. And he came in first in the primary, right?
Yes,
easily.
Yes.
But remember, California, Democrats, 46%. Republicans, 24%. Guess what? That's the story. That's the story. Unless you're in a district, someplace like Shasta County, where Democrats are barred, I mean, you're not going to win. You're just not. And so, he got into the final, and I'm not trying to be unkind to him because I think he's a very nice, bright guy. But the numbers, as Melissa was saying, the numbers at the end of the day tell the story here. This is about as deep of a blue state right now as almost any other state could possibly be. California. It's very tough for a Republican to break through.
Okay. Well, let's move to a different political office that people are starting to circle around, and that is the mayor of San Francisco. London Breed is being viewed as, I don't know if she's being viewed as vulnerable, but there are certainly politicians and potential candidates who are looking at her and saying she's currently very unpopular. San Franciscans are angry. But I think you probably find that in just about every big city these days. But let's talk about this because we've got a couple names of people who have thrown their hat in the ring or are expected to soon. We have Daniel Lurie, and as well as a District 11 supervisor. Is it Asha
Safai,
I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
Safai.
What do you think? Either of them.
I think you get a situation here where, and this goes for Oakland too. You've got two cities that are being really challenged with crime issues, homelessness issues, and voters are getting very angry. I know I live in Oakland. We hear it all the time: car break-ins, assaults on older women, armed robberies, etc. There was a meeting in Oakland last week. About hundreds of people came out. They're very angry with the district attorney there. There's a recall. This recall effort, this issue of crime, and London Breed is facing it here too. It says to me that the Democrats have got to get their hands on this issue, and we're seeing the threat. That recent poll, 64% of the respondents said London Breed does not deserve to be reelected. The supervisor, Safai, led her by 3 points in a hypothetical matchup. And he's already been talking about, getting a handle on the crime issue. I think the crime issue is going to drive a lot of the voters in both these cities.
Larry, Melissa?
Sure.
Okay, I'll go after you.
Okay. So yes, obviously crime and homelessness, but it's the fact that there are people even jumping in is kind of a big deal. Y'all remember when Ed Lee ran in 2011, there was a huge field, right? It's an empty field. Gavin Newsom gets elected governor. Ed Lee fills in. He's caretaker, not supposed to run for re-election. 600 people run, but good people too, not just the usual crazy people, really decent folks.
Yeah.
I remember we did a debate at the Commonwealth Club with 25 candidates for mayor. Everybody got 1 minute, and it was nuts. But once he gets in, when he goes to get reelected, it's there's a bunch of forgive me if there are any of them in the audience, but there's just not really big political players running against him in that second term, and that's generally how it works, right? Once you get in, you kind of coast to the second term. The fact that there are folks like the supervisor or even Daniel Lurie thinking about getting into this race tells you that this is a problem, right? This should be the case that all the big donors and all the big organizations that do the voter turnout, like the trade unions and things like that, are having second thoughts, right? They're not on board with necessarily all of them on board with this second term. And so that's what that tells me, not so much whether she's going to win or lose, but when you start seeing legit folks entering the race for a second term for a San Francisco mayor, then the current mayor is seriously in trouble and needs to start thinking about what she's going to do, assuming she wants to stay in office, which maybe she doesn't. It doesn't look like much fun. I'm just going to say, I see her up there and I'm like, I don't know why you did this. Yeah. So assuming she runs again, she's going to have to really work to get that second term. And that's a bit unusual.
And she's been slammed by so many issues, the downtown coming back, homelessness issues, mental illness, the fentanyl crisis. And she has kind of responded by getting tough on the drug dealing here in San Francisco, trying to get a handle on these smash and grab robberies, the car break-ins, etc. This is fodder for Fox News every day of the week now. There's a viral video every day of the week. How does she fight against that? I wouldn't count her out. She's a street fighter in every sense of the word. She came up from the streets in San Francisco. We've seen a parade of rich business people try to get into California politics before. You mentioned Al Checky, we could go on and on, Meg Whitman. So Daniel Lurie is connected and connected family with the Levi Strauss family, but running a city like a business, maybe a good political slogan, but in reality, voters do not have, I can't think of too many instances where they've said, yeah, let's go for it, except for Donald Trump, right? So I think that we're going to see some real conflicts here in San Francisco. You're right, and she's got her work cut out for her, but I would not count her out. I think she's a brawler politically.
Yeah, this may be a case where lots of people look good until you get to the election, right? Because whatever you want to say, she's a known quantity.
Yeah, exactly.
And all these people who are promising you everything in the world, it sounds so good when you're on the outside. Get to the election and somehow people begin to shape up and say, well, at least we know who she is, what she's doing. But Carla, you're right. I mean, we've got these issues that are in all big cities: crime, homelessness, the lack of affordable housing, the police, and on both sides, too brutal on the one hand, not enough of them on the other. I mean, these are and then there, of course, there's the COVID hangover, why places like San Francisco are so empty downtown, and other cities too. it's a tough time to be in a position of executive proportions, like a mayor. Really is. But I think as we get to looking at all the other candidates, as it gets closer and closer, she's going to look better and better. I don't know enough to win, but she'll look better and better. You know, it kind of reminds me of what's going on nationally right now. Gallup had a big to-do recently about how 49% of the country now is independent. Okay? Well, that sounds impressive, right? But then you peel the layers off on the onion. There's some guys, heavy-duty PhDs in political science, seem to know stuff. And they did some research on how independent are they? And they asked people, what do you think about taxes? What do you think about Obamacare? What do you think of all these issues that will reveal something about how you feel? It turned out by the end of the day, only 7% were independent. 7%. Okay? They really didn't know. I don't know. But everybody else leaned one way or the other. I think some of that's going to happen with London Breed and most of the other incumbents right now as they run. It gets closer and closer, and a lot of people fall into line.
But I also think, to Larry's point earlier, it's on us as voters too. I mean, you talk to people and they say, well, something's got to be done. And you go, well, what? Should we lock them up? Nope. Should we put them in institutions? Nope. Should we give them houses? Nope, can't do that. What is it? What is the thing that we need for a mayor to do that is not being done? And is it a state law issue? Because there are some limitations based on state laws. Is it a Ninth Circuit, decision that sits out there that says you can't arrest people for being on the sidewalk unless you have a place for them to go? Like, there are lots of things outside the mayor's control, and I don't think that there's a clear path forward that she's not taking. And so if you're thinking about running against her, what is your plan? Are you is it more police? People go, no, we don't want that. Well, we want the perfect police, right? We want police who do all the right things all the right time, all the time. And that's just not possible. So in some ways, we as voters need to grapple with those hard decisions about how, if you want to get rid of homelessness or get rid of crime, these are not easy things. You're not going to do it with hugs, okay? We need to figure out what is the plan, and then we can demand that from our leaders. But flailing around and being like, somebody do something, that's not helpful, and it's not going to get us to the place we need to go.
And they cost a lot of money. And the question is, do people want to pay the money it costs to do it right? At the end of the day, a lot of people, well, not so much.
Okay, well, let's go back into the Wayback Machine or the repeating machine, whatever that would be. Because on October 1st, 2023, we're looking at perhaps another government shutdown.
Not to be confused with the debt ceiling.
Well, and see, the debt ceiling they got this resolution, and I kind of thought from that, oh, good, that's off the table for a while. But I didn't realize, so there are these 12 big appropriations law bills that have to pass. It covers about, 25% of the budget that need to be by law, reappropriated every year or however often. And if they don't do it in time, there's a shutdown of the government. And this seems to be a case of the kind of intra-Republican House politics. Meaning the U.S. House of Representatives politics. And I'm kind of wondering, so what we have is, or at least what I've been seeing, maybe you guys have seen other stuff, but it's the hard right kind of taking revenge on feeling, or because they felt that the debt ceiling deal had been a Biden win. What are your thoughts about this?
I think once again we're seeing, government by social media theater. You've got now a group of Republicans, hard right Republicans in Washington, who are addicted to clickbait, to putting out clickbait, and not so much addicted to government or governing. And they've gone on, right now there's a recess. Without doing anything. And of course, you're right, they're going to use this moment to try and jam Biden for cuts in the budget, but there won't be substantive discussions. This is all about social media again. And I think this is the cycle we're in up there, and I think McCarthy hasn't done anything to halt that cycle. It's very frustrating to watch, I think.
So the essence is that Kevin McCarthy is between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah.
Now this was brought on by the way that he gave in to all these various conditions that allowed him to be recalled if somebody sneezes. Okay, that's enough.
Yeah.
So the deal here is that, I'm sure most of you know, the guys on the far right, about 15 of them, and that's enough because he's got a 5-person majority. 5 of them said, we want you to go back to 2022 spending levels, which was considerably lower than what we got during this fiscal year. And we're not going to go ahead and vote for anything to get this through unless you do that. And if he does that, then he's stuck because there are a number of Republicans, about 20 of them, who are in Biden districts. In other words, they won at the same district where Biden won. They don't dare vote for this, which means McCarthy will need Democrats to get the budget through. Well, they're not going to vote for him unless he agrees not to or disagrees with it. So he goes in and gives to the Democrats on the one hand, gets the budget through, or he fights it and we have a shutdown, in which case he'll probably wind up catching whatever you want to say, fill in the blank, for it as well. This guy does not have a long political life right now.
Yeah.
It really doesn't. I mean, he's caught. He's in no man's land, no person's land. And
No, you can have that one.
no, I've got to be politically correct here.
On behalf of women, it's fine.
Yeah, I'm surrounded. But this is tough for him, and it's not going to be good.
But he fought so hard to get in this place.
Yeah.
That is terrible.
Yeah, yeah.
You never saw somebody fight so hard for a terrible trophy.
15 votes it took, right? Look what he gets from it. No, he's toast because one way or the other, he's going to be in trouble. And this is the problem with the Republican majority. And it's so interesting to me because they've got all the way from the far right to let's call it just right of center. Nancy Pelosi had the opposite. She had far left to just left of center. And she had a 4-person majority. And she got everything through. Mm-hmm. But, that gets
Well, the Democrats weren't really fighting to cut, though.
But that gets to stewardship. That gets to leadership. And she was able to hold all these things together, all these different elements. And he can't. Sorry, Kevin.
I mean, so y'all remember back when they shut down I think there were a bunch of parks that shut down. Everyone found out what the federal parks were because they were the ones who were closed, like Alcatraz in certain places. So that's the kind of thing that we would be up against again. They have 3 weeks, I think, to pass 11 budget bills. So I'm sure it'll be fine.
Which is to say, if they do jam them through in that amount of time, they're going to be really well written.
You're going to see a shutdown.
Yeah. I mean, and is it any wonder that I think Americans are increasingly just disenchanted with both political parties, which is why we're seeing, an opening in the presidential race. You're no labels.
Let's get in. That was our next topic before the quiz. We wanted to talk about the presidential campaign, the candidates, and no labels. Tell people what that is in case they haven't heard of it.
Yeah, I mean, independent Joe Lieberman and Senator Manchin have been out there pushing for kind of an independent.
Larry Hogan.
Yes, right. An independent kind of look at the presidential race, bring up candidates that may be sort of bipartisan, if that even exists. The fact is that you've got, Robert Kennedy Jr., who now has, higher approval ratings than Joe Biden also. I mean, I think he's what is he polling now?
About 18%.
18%. And I'll just say it, he's a nutcase, okay? I think he's a nutcase. Okay, but the bottom line is we know that he's been, his campaign and his PAC has been funded by Republicans, Trump donors, major Trump donors.
He's not affiliated with No Labels, though, right?
He's not affiliated with No Labels. But if we're talking about independent candidates, you've also got, Cornel West, Green Party. Who's his campaign manager? Jill Stein. What did she get in the last election? 1.1% in 3 states that Trump flipped. She was the deciding factor in those states. And they're back again. The Green Party's back again. I think Cornel West, you can imagine, is going to suck votes away from Joe Biden. Whether Robert F. Kennedy is, Steve Bannon is already suggesting a Trump-Kennedy ticket. So watch that,
Well, you got a couple of things here. How much time do we have?
About 5 minutes.
You got a couple of things here. One is, Kennedy and the effort to get the Democratic nomination, and we know that's going to go flat. But no labels, I think, is really important. We need to realize a couple of things. You just don't get on the ballot in 50 states like that.
Yes, right.
Every state has a different set of requirements, and it's expensive, it's time-consuming, and it's hard to do. No Labels right now has tentatively qualified themselves in 6 states, 4 of whom I've never heard of. And so what it boils down to at the end is that, as you said, Carla, a group like No Labels or Cornel West or anybody else, what they wind up doing is taking away votes from one of the 2 parties disproportionately. Correct. Think of Ralph Nader and Al Gore in Florida, right? 95,000 votes out of 6 million cast, and you know what happened, okay? The entire election. Think of Ross Perot in 1992 and what happened to George H.W. Bush. The last time a third party had any success whatsoever was in 1912, and that's even before I was born, just a little bit. And that was when Teddy Roosevelt and the Progressive Party came in second, okay, costing Robert Taft the job, William Taft, excuse me, and letting Woodrow Wilson sneak in. So the third party thing does nothing for No Label. It's not going to happen, folks. I'm sorry, it's just not. The system is not built for that. But
Why
they
isn't
certainly
it, though?
can. They certainly can cause havoc.
Right.
But why is it though?
It's the
why
way
is
the
it?
system's
No,
set up.
I know, but that's wrong.
Okay.
It is wrong that Democrats and Republicans automatically get on the ballot, but No Labels has to petition and pay and poll people in every state to get on the ballot. It is wrong that we have 2 parties that, instead of running candidates that people want to vote for, are suing to keep No Labels off ballots. Imagine a recording of the CEO of Coke saying, we got to keep Pepsi out because if we let Pepsi in, everyone will just drink Pepsi. You would say that's really embarrassing. Fix your own product, Coke. Well, fix your own product, Democrats. Fix your own product, Republicans, and put somebody forward that people want to vote for. And it is such an example of why people are disgusted with parties that they are suing to do things like keep No Labels off the ballot. God forbid there should be a party that's about compromise and about evidence. And even if it ruins everything in an election, how long can we keep going when we keep getting 2 parties burbling up candidates that no one really wants to vote for, that everyone is just voting against? How long is that going to last? I'm sorry, welcome to my TED Talk. I'm just really passionate about that.
Well, listen, we've come to the end of our program. We're going to be back here August 30th, so please join us again for our next Week to Week. For tonight, I want to thank our great panelists, Carla Marinucci, Dr. Larry Gersten, Melissa Kane, for a great conversation. Thanks to all of you for being here, and everyone who's watching or listening online. Have a great week. Stay safe. We'll see you again.
Okay.